not receive 1 cent in return. And it's very important to understand why. And it's embodied in the National Energy Policy when Mark Lalonde, who was the author of the National Energy Policy in 1980, was asked, why did you introduce the National Energy Policy? And we have the video of his response. And it was, we could not let Alberta become the center of economic power in Canada. Now that will never change. That attitude will never change. And you have to internalize that, because we will be subjugated forever unless $500 billion of planned investment in Alberta ceased. It didn't occur. Why? Because of federal regulations. And it's important to understand this. In fact, there was, interestingly enough, this came out the other day from the Frontier Center for Public Policy. They evaluated the loss that Alberta experiences as a result of not being able to market our oil and gas to an international market. And that amount is $26.5 billion per year, which would come into the Alberta economy had we had the ability to market our products, our oil and gas, to an international market. So these are the kinds of oppressive policies. What about values? Well, how many people here are really keen about DEI and ESG? How many people here are keen about censorship? How many people here are keen about a central bank digital currency that will control every aspect of your life? Well, these are some of the values in Mr. Carney's book entitled Values. Those are his values. Now, let's look at the issue of property rights and think of it in terms of the gun legislation. The federal government wants to confiscate your guns, or at least the majority of them. And Jeff can speak eloquently about this from a constitutional perspective. But the reality is that as David Lametti, the former Minister of Justice in the Trudeau government, who will now have some position in the new federal government, has stated, Canadians do not have the right to own property. Internalize that. This is the kind of thing that we need to get out from under. Notwithstanding, let's look at health as another example of a problem here. The Canadian government has signed on to the World Health Organization Pandemic Treaty. That has the ability, once again, to control your life, perhaps even to a greater extent than you experienced during the COVID pandemic, or non-pandemic, as it were. Now, the Premier has said that we are not going to allow the World Health Organization dictate to us health policy. That's provincial jurisdiction. But the Premier needs to give her head a shake. Why? Because how are we funded? Well, we give $70 billion a year to the federal government, and they send us back about $27 billion to look after social transfers, infrastructure transfers, education transfers, and health transfers. So if the provincial government, any provincial government, is not compliant with federal regulation and federal dictates, guess what happens? The federal government withholds those transfer payments until the provincial government becomes compliant. So I can't believe that under the circumstances of Alberta not following federal health policy as dictated by the World Health Organization, I can't believe that the federal government wouldn't withhold transfer payments, and I can't believe that the Premier would continue to be non-compliant. So think about that. at how the federal government controls us, just with that one example. Now let's look at economic growth. Of all the industrialized nations in the world, economic growth in Canada was the lowest. Well, what does that tell you about the way in which our government federally has managed things? I don't think anybody's very happy with the circumstances. But you know what? The part of the problem, most people don't even realize it, do they? And part of our responsibility as a nonprofit, nonpartisan educational society is to educate people about these things, to educate people about the rationale and the merits of Alberta sovereignty. Now let's look at what the Premier has said recently. And I will say that she is a Premier that has stood up against the federal government, perhaps even more than any previous And she has made a number of demands. And she has said if those demands are not met, that will be a threat to national unity. Well, that can only mean one thing, right? It means Alberta leaves. Does she have the courage actually to follow through? Well, we'll find out. But we can help steel her spine. When we grow this membership to several hundred thousand or a million or greater, she will not be able to ignore the movement. And at some point, she may well get in front of this movement. As Ralph Klein used to say, find a parade and get in front of it. Well, we'll see if that happens. She has publicly stated she's going to give these negotiations 6 months. Well, we'll see what happens there. She's talked about a number of demands. One of them is ending equalization. What does that require? It requires opening and changing the Constitution. How's she going to do that just by negotiating? She can't. It's not going to happen. There are so many constitutional
she's going to ask you about it.
that are required. It would take decades of negotiating to try and solve these problems. And right now, just so everybody's aware, the provincial government has some 18 lawsuits against the federal government. And how long do you think it's going to take? How much time do you think we have before Mr. Carney creates even more carnage than the former Prime Minister did? We don't have too much time. All right, so 6 months apparently is the timeline that she has talked about in terms of, well, I guess you could say Plan B. Maybe, just maybe, she might get in front of this. I don't really know. But let's look at what's happening in terms of the reality here. We know that we have a legal pathway out of this morass that we're in. And that is the Clarity Act. The Clarity Act was developed
For those of you tuning in, it's Dennis Modry currently speaking.
Secession reference, the federal government posed the question, does a province have the right to unilaterally leave Canada? And they posed that question to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court came back with, no, you can't unilaterally do that, but if you follow this pathway, a province can legally leave. And what does it require? Simply that there be a clear question on leaving Canada and becoming a sovereign nation, and that there be a clear majority, and that there be appropriate negotiations with other interested parties, such as First Nations, such as other political parties, and other perhaps interested groups. So this is the legal pathway. And so where are we at right now? Well, in May of 2022, the provincial government passed what is called the Citizens Initiative Act. The Citizens Initiative Act required for a constitutional change petition, that there be 600,000 people that sign a petition for some constitutional change, such as Alberta sovereignty. And those signatures needed to be collected within 90 days. Well, if you think about that, that's virtually impossible to do. So
No, it's not.
we came across a workaround. And that workaround was actually really quite simple. I'm surprised that Mr. Kenny never thought of blocking us yet again. But he didn't. So this is what we came up with. We said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to collect the contact information of 600,000 people. And when we've got the contact information of 600,000 people, we will submit our petition.
John B., then share it for me.
To Elections Alberta. Elections Alberta will certify it. And then we will send out the canvassers. But guess what? Now we know where to send the canvassers because we have the contact information of 600,000 people. Now, many of you are aware that Bill 54 that has been proposed by the UCP government reduces that threshold from 600,000 to 10% of the number of people who voted in the last election. So the new threshold is around 177,000. And to my understanding, we're already somewhat north of that. Even with, say, 250,000 people, and I don't know what the exact number is, that have registered their intent or have signed a petition, there's a certain circle of people around that 177,000 or 250,000 people that signed the petition. There's a much larger circle around 800,000 or 900,000 people who have signed the petition. Because what we're really after is 1.5 million people who will vote in favor of Alberta sovereignty. There's about 2.8 million eligible voters in the province of Alberta. Our target is at least 1.5 million who will vote in favor of the referendum. So at some point, our board of directors will make a decision as to when we launch the petition. But personally, I would like to see, this will be a decision made by the board, not just by me. I would like to see the growth of the numbers of people who have registered for the petition to be of a sufficient magnitude that gives us confidence that when we launch the petition and the provincial government gets it and they hold the referendum, we have a guaranteed win on the referendum. I'm going to close with a question, and I want to show on hands. And it's the same question that I posed to Ralph. And there's a reason why I'm posting this question, and you'll find out after you answer it. All right, so the question is, if Alberta was already a sovereign country, would you want Alberta to join Confederation under the current terms and cost of membership? Raise your hands. Nobody raises your hand.
Not one.
The corollary then is you all have an obligation then to help us.
So why are we still here?
Get other people to support Alberta sovereignty, to register their intent. And if every one of you gets 3 or 4 people, by the looks of this crowd, we'll have another 5,000 or 8,000 or 10,000 people who have registered their intent, and we will continue to grow this movement. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to say to you all, thank you from the bottom of my cardiac surgical heart for all of your support and for listening to my language this evening. Thank you so much.
Canada. You don't think this is real? Look around.
And plug away day after day. You guys may talk to me at some point if you've registered. All of our volunteers here, I want to give an extended hand because to put something like this together takes a lot. So thank you to all of our volunteers. Our third speaker tonight is Mr. Jeffrey Rath. And he's proud Albertan. He's well versed in the Constitution, the constitutional laws for Indigenous leaders, as well as all of the citizens here in Alberta. He is a general counsel for APP, and he has been a mastermind behind the movement. He's a very big supporter of Alberta independence, and I would like to welcome Jeffrey Rath.
Thank you so much. Look around, everybody. This is what too big to rig looks like. I'm so proud and so happy to be here tonight to share the energy in this room. There's over
Of course, always here for the people.
1,000 Albertans here tonight. Across the province this summer in support of Alberta freedom and Alberta independence. Look around at all of our volunteers who are
Share
here
this
working
live stream,
tonight.
Ruckin.
None of this would be happening without them. We have, at the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much. I guess some of you have heard that since Mark Carney was elected 2.5 weeks ago, we've now had over 15,000 new volunteers come forward. I'd like everybody to think about that for a minute, because that's actually more volunteers than we have infantry in the entire Canadian Army. Helping to get people organized. We're going to be 60 town halls across the province this summer. We're planning 2 massive door-knocking campaigns. We're going to want to knock on every door in this province at least twice. All 87 constituencies in this province. First of all, in support of the referendum petition. And I guess as you heard from Dr. Modry today, as of today, and the latest number that I got from our good friend and colleague and CEO, Mitch Sylvester, 240,000 people. In Alberta, which we hope to have happen this year. Now, to be clear, there's a lot of discussion around that. Some people say, oh, well, maybe we should wait until next year, whatever it is. Keep in mind, I'm a litigator. I like setting aggressive trial dates. I want to have all the planning in place. We want to be ready to go. And, in my view, there's no reason that, we can't have every Albertan organized and ready for a referendum in November of 2025. 240,000 pledges. By the end of May, we want to be over 400,000 pledges. By the end of June, we want to be easily over 600,000 pledges. And our goal is by the end of the town hall campaign and the door knocking campaign this summer, by September, we want to be at least at 1 million pledges for people that are voting in favor of Alberta. And why we're on this road. All of us have lived our lives in this province as proud Albertans and are just sick and tired of seeing the wealth of this province being stolen from us to feed the egos of politicians in Quebec who do not want our dirty oil passing through their province. We're quite happy to take our dirty money that's generated by the oil. But they don't want us to prosper. They don't want our industries to prosper. aspect of our lives, including what firearms we're allowed to own, what type of cars we're supposed to drive, all the rest of it. I mean, literally, at some point, if I recall, under the lunacy of the Trudeau regime, they were literally talking about getting rid of all gas-powered vehicles by 2035. I mean, how the hell does anybody get through an Alberta winter at minus 40, in an electric vehicle when they're going to drive, 150 or 250 kilometers to and from a job site? It doesn't work. But of course, these are policies that are made by people that don't work for a living, don't understand people who work for a living, and do not give a damn about people who work for a living. So it's governed by a bunch of climate lunatics who engage in the same level of magical thinking as the ancient Mayans that led to the end of their civilization. These people literally believe that by cutting out the hearts of Alberta men and women working to feed their families, by literally cutting out their hearts with excessive taxation, that they can change the weather. Has anybody heard anything so stupid? But these are the people that are governing us. And then, of course, when we saw the start of the Great Phony Tariff War, that Justin Trudeau kicked off in order to get Marxist Carney elected, right? We saw Doug Ford jumping up and down and turning red in the face and saying, "Fight these tariffs, we're going to shut off Alberta oil." And then people pointed out, "Okay, jackass, do you understand that your Ontario oil from Alberta leaves Alberta on Enbridge Line 5, goes down into the United States, and then back up into Ontario through Line 9. So when you're proposing cutting off Alberta oil to the United States, you're literally talking about cutting off Alberta oil to Eastern Canada. Right?
Do it anyway.
And quite frankly, I mean, that is the problem, with this so-called federal system that we work under. You notice that Doug Ford never said, "Hey, I'm going to teach President Trump a lesson on the integration of the North American auto industry. I'm going to shut down parts plants in Ontario for a week and bring North American production to a halt." Did we ever hear that suggestion? Oh no! We're going to shut off Alberta oil. Oh, I can't shut off Alberta oil? Okay, then I'm going to kick Saskatchewan in the crotch, and I'm going to shut down all their potash production and teach American farmers a lesson by killing all their crops by not supplying them with fertilizer. I mean, this is the level of sheer stupidity that we are being governed with by people from Ontario and politicians from Quebec. The other thing that was hilarious was the gibbering Gibault, the climate Nazi who was running carbon, policy for Trudeau, was shocked to find out that there wasn't an east-west pipeline in Canada that was supplying Alberta oil to eastern Canada, and that he couldn't cut off oil to the United States. At this point, after 10 years of literally trying to destroy the Alberta economy, Gibault woke up to the idea that maybe we need to have an east-west pipeline. You got a thing? Okay? This is the foolishness that we deal with. And then the problem we have is that because of the federal structure and the nature of federalism, it even infects, our locally elected MPs, and it infects our provincial politics. Let's look at Jason Kenney. Jason Kenney. I know, we all love Jason Kenney. He called me a traitor to Duke a couple weeks ago. So anyway, look at Jason Kenney. Why do you think he opposed all of those obnoxious and stupid COVID policies that he imposed on us? But why did he want to tell us how many friends he could have? Right? Shut down our schools so that while leaving the bars, casinos, and strip clubs open, so our 18-year-old, sons and daughters, couldn't go to high school, but they could go to the bars, the casinos, and the strip clubs. I mean, this was the idiocy of Jason Kenney in government, right? And why was he that foolish, and why was he enacting all of these harmful policies that were dictated to him by Justin Trudeau? Why was Jason Kenney, even though he was elected as a conservative, governing like a Trudeau liberal? because he has federal aspirations to run for federal office. Right? So he can't get elected as Prime Minister of Canada, unless you can pander to the people in Ontario who think, that freedom is a bad word, everybody should be locked in their homes when the government decides to lock us in our homes, we should be treated like children on a regular basis, etc., etc. Kenny knows to get elected in Eastern Canada, you've got to be able to telegraph that form of mentality to people because they like to be treated like children and that's what they expect from their leaders, right? So that's why we suffer what we're suffering. Look at Pierre Poilievre. He was running a national campaign, not as a conservative, but as a Trudeau liberal. He would not say that he was opposed to Alberta transfer payments going to Ontario, Quebec, and the Maritimes. Claims to be from Alberta, right? And here he is now because, of course, he couldn't get re-elected in Ottawa, which is really where he belongs. He's now coming here running the Battle River Crowfoot, and he's still like double dog Pierre. Pierre, I have a slogan for you. The slogan is, no more Alberta tax dollars for Quebec, and a dairy cow and micro dairy in every Alberta barn that wants one. And then see how well that plays in Ontario and Quebec. Right? And that's the problem with the structure of Canadian federalism in a nutshell. The needs and aspirations of people in Quebec and Ontario are so completely divorced from the needs and aspirations and ambitions of people in places like Alberta and Saskatchewan, where we actually work for a living, that the governance of us is oppressive, is an existential threat to us, and makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
There's now Jeff Rath speaking for all of you joining now.
He would have some dream about, we don't know whether he's fetishizing and having wet dreams or whether he's actually scared of guns, right? You're never sure when Dustin might actually drive them. But every time you turn around, you come up with a new list of Alberta property that he wanted to confiscate from us. And let's be clear, federal gun confiscation laws in Alberta are patently illegal and violate Section 9213 of the Constitution Act of 1867. It is the exclusive domain of the provincial government, not the federal government. So, if Justin Trudeau said, well, gun crime is a problem, I'm now going to increase, the penalties for assault with a firearm or armed robbery or whatever to life in prison with no possibility of parole, which most of us wouldn't have a problem with.
Everyone tuning in, make sure you subscribe if you haven't already.
Constitutional order of Canada, but to simply decide and declare that people's personal property in the province of Alberta is now illegal and subject to federal confiscation goes so far beyond the constitutional order of Canada as to, in my mind, coupled with the comments of idiots like David Lametti, who says that property rights don't exist in Canada, constitutes a constitutional crisis which should in and of itself drive Alberta out of Canada. Some of you have heard me say this before, and that is, we don't actually have to leave Canada anymore. In the last election, Ontario and Quebec actually voted to separate when they elected Mark Carney, right? And now all we are doing is giving effect to their choice to not be, joined with Alberta anymore, and it's now our business over the next 6 to 12 months to give effect to getting Alberta the hell out of Canada. I mean, we could be here until midnight. Okay? So what I'd like to do now is focus on the economic message that I would like all of us to share with our fellow Albertans. Everybody here, there's 1,000 people here. I have a challenge for each and every one of you that are cheering and applauding tonight. I'd like every one of you to sign up 20 friends, 20 family members. Get them to go to APP, sign up for the petition.
30 people here. Go to app.com.
20 each, that'll give us another 20,000, and then so on. And let's just keep this going. It's important that we do that. We have to share. I want everybody to focus on how much better off Alberta is going to be when we are completely free of all forms of federal taxation.
After Jeff, I will be going offline, folks.
Holiday is going to end as soon as the throne speech is over this July, and our fuel prices are going to go back to $1.80 a liter, right? But because of course, if you read his book, as Dennis points out, that's what he actually believes, not actually giving working Albertans a break. We don't know he only did that to get elected. So there'll be no more carbon tax. There'll be no more federal excise tax or fuel tax. No more federal corporate taxes. No more federal capital gains tax. No more having CRA presuming to be your partner in business, telling you, when you should be collecting receivables from your clients, how you should be dealing with your clients, how you should be managing your affairs, and we'll go back to a sensible system where people are actually taxed on money that they've actually brought in, as opposed to receivables on their books or inventory or any of the other things that CRA has been steeping into people's lives over the last 5 years to make the lives of small business people and business owners in Alberta completely miserable. Right? If you look at the average salary of the average Albertan, which they pay $78,000 a year, if you take all of the federal taxes, the cost of all of the federal regulations, all of the costs that are piled on the average working man or woman in this province, the average person's actual spending power from that $78,000 is probably closer to $31,000 to $35,000.
Not even.
It's ridiculous what they're doing to us. They are intentionally keeping us in poverty. They are intentionally making people's lives miserable. Because, of course, to quote Klaus Schwab and David Clementi, you will own nothing and be happy. This is literally what they're trying to do to us. But in a new Alberta tax, regime, where we have a 10% flat tax on income, a 10% flat tax, on corporations, a doubling of our oil and gas output, so that the entire economy in this province is thriving, we could easily afford those tax levels, and the average take-home pay of the person making $78,000 a year would increase from $31,000 to $35,000 to $65,000 to $70,000. Do you agree that the province of Alberta shall become a sovereign country and cease to be a province of Canada? What you're really doing is voting yourself, depending on your tax bracket, between a 30 to 50% pay raise. There was a show when I was a kid called The Courtship of Eddie's Father, right? So, let's call it The Courtship of Danielle Smith. Barney coming to Alberta with his bosses and making sweet little offers to her about, I can do that really better. I can't get any pipelines, but I'll make big promises as energy mega projects that don't burn fossil fuels. Maybe I'll get a couple million or a couple billion dollars back to build hydrogen plants like the ones they have in Newfoundland or whatever other stupid things Barney can see to bring to the table to entice Danielle Smith into selling out her own citizens, right? But going forward basis, what everybody has to understand, there isn't a goddamn thing, excuse my language, there is not a thing that Mark Carney can offer Alberta that is more valuable than a complete end to all federal regulation and all federal taxation in the province of Alberta. federal health transfer. Oh my goodness, you mean you're not going to give us any more of our money back? That's exactly right. Begging for money to pay for our doctors, to pay for our nurses, to pay for our schools, to pay for our roads, because you're sending, like literally taking $70 billion out of Alberta, running it through a grotesquely bloated federal bureaucracy that has doubled in size since the advent of the Trudeau Liberals. So you're running through this grossly bloated bureaucracy, then take $40 billion off the top and sprinkle it out, $15 billion at the back, and the rest of it spread between bullshit federal projects in the Maritimes, Ontario, or wherever. God knows Alberta should be paying for Justin Trudeau's electric choo-choo train between Toronto and Montreal.
Roughly, yeah.
Right? So by the time all the money is doled out and we get our paltry 27 to 30 billion a year back, including the 3 billion a year in Alberta pensioners, Alberta is way in the hole, and if we had that extra 40 billion a year, let's face it, all of the issues in this province would literally be solved overnight. I know there's Aboriginal people in this province that are concerned about this project. I say to them, why do you want